Well, thanks, Senator.
Thank you very much.
The ATSB public report released on the 30th of August 2012 is factually incorrect and contains flawed analysis. On reading the first draft, I was of the opinion that the investigation was due to incompetence, but on seeing the second draft and subsequent final report, I have a different opinion. In light of the CASA special audit now in the public arena, I believe that the ATSB report is partly incompetence, but now I am of the opinion it contains deliberate and intentional omission of safety critical facts and evidence which has substantially changed the findings and analysis. Any aviation safety professional who reads the drafts, the final report, alongside the now public special audit can only form the same reasonable conclusions. I believe the committee should determine if there has in fact been an attempt to breach the TSI Act of 2003. The ATSB and CASA never intended the special audit to be in the public arena. The ATSB legislation contains very punitive penalties for release of draft reports, and on reading the explanatory material from the Parliament, these provisions, I believe, were intended to protect the participants involved in the transport incident or accident, not the investigative body or the regulator. The ATSB are themselves protected using these provisions of the protections of the draft reports, and I do believe that under those provisions they are somewhat protected from public scrutiny. Hence we're here today. What's happened to Dominic James and Karen Casey, who's here today as well, has passed, but I think that's now the vehicle for us to uncover what's actually going on behind the scenes. This safety critical information which adversely affects an investigation can only affect the travelling public in the end. CASA, by not responding as a directly involved party that significant deficiencies with the operator and its manual existed at the time of the accident, and that the CASA special audit identified many deficiencies, by CASA knowingly allowing the ATSB to make the statements that the operator's procedures and manuals complied with the regulations is intentional, deliberate, and has omitted major oversight deficiencies which have had an adverse effect on the safety of the travelling public and their confidence in our aviation safety administration. I believe the evidence is striking, and the question who's orchestrated these critical omissions on the Australian public is now required to be answered. Both organisations, CASA and the ATSB, exist to safeguard the travelling public and not to treat them with contempt, nor should they regard them as stupid. In this case, they've put the self-interests of themselves or others before that of the travelling public. I find it quite bizarre that we have a zero-tolerance aviation security legislation that takes nail files and knitting needles off people at airports, and yet those people can pass out onto the tarmac and board aircraft that have no regulated takeoff weights, performance worked out. They have life-saving equipment that doesn't work. We have the situation where the fatigue levels of the pilots are equivalent to over 0.05. We've got the situation here where the first time the crew actually used the emergency exit trainings was when it was underwater. They'd never done it before in their training. I just want to know how we get to this point. It's quite bizarre. Well, I'm happy to take any questions, and I just want to say I've probably only need a few minutes in Canberra to just detail some other safety critical things.
Senator Fawcett.
Mr Aherne, thank you very much, and thank you for your detailed submission. Can I just go first to your experience in accident investigation? A couple of questions. One in terms of how long it should take to close out recommendations from an ATSB report. I go back to the Bell 407 that crashed in Queensland on an emergency medical service mission.
Yes.
With fatalities, and the subsequent report in 2003 that recommended that air ambulance work shouldn't be air work.
That's right.
Because it needed more protection. And clearly, long period from 2003 until that accident.
In fact, Senator, the 2003 report refers to a 2001 recommendation the ATSB made to CASA, so it actually goes back 11 years.
Okay. How long is there an average? Because of complexities, do things take different amounts of time? But is a decade a long time?
I think a decade's too long. But look, I understand it's very frustrating for CASA because they need to get things through the parliamentary process, and I believe the Attorney General's Department is necessarily slow. I mean, it has to be a precise type event, the way they go and draft the law. But I think even CASA would admit that a decade is too long to get a safety recommendation to the point where they now believe they can do it, but it's still another 2 years away. And my problem is, Senator, that the passengers on an aeromedical flight, and I've done many of them, who don't have the choice of whether they can elect to go on the aircraft or not. Most of the time they're not in a fit state to make that choice. Their families and themselves would assume that they're in a very safe environment, and we find the situation where they're not.
So should there be, in cases where safety is a factor, more of an option for CASA to work with regulation or orders as opposed to legislation, pending a legislative follow-up?
I think CASA would agree that the industry, when CASA take things out to the industry push back, and they do so necessarily because of costs. But I think we as an aviation system have matured past that point. The technology's available now, the engine reliability, the performance margins in particularly twin-engine helicopters that I have a background in, are far superior to even when I was flying them in the 90s, where if they put aeromedical flights from airwork into charter, a lot of the helicopters wouldn't be able to maintain performance on one engine. So the operators in those days pushed back and wanted to keep aeromedical work in aerial work. But I think it's time now that we should, and obviously CASA has agreed that they will push this. But if they did their job back in 2001 and took it seriously then, this accident probably wouldn't have happened because that aircraft is not capable of doing that work in a charter role.
Sure. Can we go to the structure of the report? And we'll come back to some of those aircraft issues. But in both organisational and human factors senses, and your submission makes note of Professor Reason and the safety model that he's brought through where it looks at all of those systemic factors and the defences that they offer. In your opinion, is it normal for a report to be essentially devoid of either a factual or an analysis section on organisational or human factors?
But no. And in fact, I mean, I've itemised the ICAO Annex 13 format, which the Australian CASA and the ATSB have signed to, and their format can be different, but the content can't be different. The content needs to be changed so that I've detailed from ICAO's aviation accident manual the type of things that are required to be in a report which are not in this report, and it's completely devoid of organisational issues and regulatory issues. It's almost as if the flight crew perished. There's like no explanation of why this thing happened. I find it quite incredible.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned, well, in fact, are there any human factors issues as you look at the incidents that you think should have been highlighted in the report? And
yes.
Bearing in mind time, we don't need the whole thing, just to identify briefly what they are.
Oh, definitely there's human factors in the training that the pilot received, the training that he did. He assumed what he was doing was in accordance with the company SOPs. He was told to do a flight out to a place that he'd never been before. And I mean, he was operating within a company structure, and there are so many human factors involved in his training in terms of reacting to the threats coming at him from outside, where, for instance, information that is coming to him is of a limited nature or not of a nature where he can elicit the most information, and the errors that they made on the evening of the flight didn't seem to get trapped by the system. And normally our system is of such a level where errors made on the flight deck or in planning would get trapped. But normally errors like that, probably, as you know, Senator, I mean, they're made out on the flight line on a daily basis, but our aviation system is so advanced, we hope, that those sort of errors don't escalate to what this did. And so there are many human factors involved, as well as the fatigue issues. You could talk about this for hours.
Okay. Are there other, within, say, the past decade, are there other ATSB reports of serious incidents that don't go to those organisational and human factors issues?
I don't remember one.
Okay. You made the comment about the suitability of the aircraft. On what basis do you make that assertion?
The first reason is because it not being approved to operate in RVSM airspace, because you have to plan to operate around that airspace according to the Fiji and the New Zealand Aeronautical Information publication. When you're operating at those lower levels and burning higher fuel rate, particularly on that leg from Samoa back to Norfolk Island, the aircraft just can't uplift that fuel to do that flight legally. And if you do that flight with not being capable of flight planning below that airspace, if in fact you get up into that airspace and are bumped out of it again because Fiji or the New Zealand ATC decide that you haven't got enough separation, if you can't do the rest of the leg in that non-RVSM airspace, you've got problems. And obviously that's what happened to the pilot on the night, and luckily he was able to scrape back up. Now, if New Zealand ATC had have done their job and said, we're sorry, we can't let you in, he would have diverted to Fiji and we wouldn't be here.